to Unapologetically Fierce with Faith, brought to you by CKJ Live. This is a safe place where my beloved tribe members and I put anything and everything on the table and dish the unfiltered tea. We are not just a podcast, we are a movement. So get your favorite beverage on hand and enjoy the show. Hey guys, how's everyone doing?
Hey, how are you?
Hey, ladies.
Hey.
Hey,
Happy podcast day. Woohoo. We are continuing our relationship series, and last week we spoke about mothers. So this week we're talking about fathers. So when everyone thinks about dad, a father is the first man in a girl's life that she will know. Her father sets a standard for all other men that come in her life. What do you guys think about that?
I agree.
That's so true. So true. So I don't know. Let's get down and tackle it. Like, talk about it.
Okay, let's get into it. I'm ready.
Let's get into it.
Are left out of the loop because I think everybody always focuses so much on mom, because she's the day-to-day caretaker. But yeah, let's talk about dads. That should be interesting to kind of get into that dynamic a bit.
Definitely. Carrie?
Absolutely. So I would honestly say from my perspective, a father really just shape that male relationship from the beginning, whether good or bad, right? We have a lot of times we hear about relationships that weren't so good, and that actually sets the tone for sometimes a male or a female. I have been really blessed that my father was a really good inspirational support system, and it really taught me what to expect. And he really has changed my perspective on everything, and probably made it harder for the men in my life, the men that I dated and eventually married. So I would honestly say that my father, at the end of the day, probably made it harder for anyone, because I saw him as a support system, as a friend, as someone that, had my back, was a provider. He did everything. He worked, he cooked, he talked to us, he picked up my friends, he was funny. I really had a great example, and I'm very blessed. This is a different dynamic to probably what everyone has heard about my dad. My father didn't have the best example as a father, and I think that made him even stronger as a man and as a father. His father was more of I guess they say, a gigolo or a playboy, womanizer, loved the women and was always in the streets. And my father was raised by strong women, and because of that, I think he vowed to always be a good man and father, and he lived up to it.
That's good. That's good. Tam, how has your relationship with your dad evolved since childhood?
My dad and I have a really interesting dynamic in that, we currently don't speak, which is, I don't want to get into that because that involves my mom's relationship with him and things of that nature. But growing up, though, I will say it's really strange looking at where we are now, because he was, in my opinion, the ideal dad. He was stern when he needed to be, but with me, he was also soft. I was closer to him. And I think I talked about that a little bit in the mom series, that I was closer to him because I felt like I still actually do feel like I'm a lot like him. So I feel like he understood me in a lot of ways. And, he also obviously let me get away with things that my mom would never. So we had a very good, dynamic, a lot of time spent just me and him talking and, doing little menial things, but I just always wanted to be around him. I was just always in awe of this big, 6'4", man that I just thought was the most amazing thing ever. So it's interesting to go from that dynamic to, maybe where we are now, where we don't really speak unless, something major life altering occurs, in which case, you reach out. Just, my mom is very much the, you must call your father and let him know this, and you have to call your dad and tell him that. So we do have that dynamic, which is very different from where we started. But, I think that he did so much good when he was around that I almost feel like it's okay that we don't really, I don't feel like he owes me a lot, which is, maybe a weird thing to say, but honestly, that's just how I feel. So yeah, that's kind of where that relationship is right now. And who knows, maybe it'll continue to evolve to us, maybe rekindling that relationship in the future. But, we'll see. I'll update you guys. But for now, that's kind of where that is.
Okay. Good. I know that now the funny thing about it is when you think about your relationship with your father and how it affects romantic relationships. And it's funny as being the only one on here that hasn't been married. But I think that my relationship with my dad affected me, my romantic relationships, because my dad left at a young age. But so it kind of made me, like, when I finally got, like in adolescence and like young adult and stuff, it's like I crave the attention that my dad didn't give me. Like, my dad gave me a lot of attention when before, like, my sister was born, my younger sister. But after that, and after he left, it was like I'm out, kind of. But yeah, so it's just kind of left me aloof, and a lot of aloof. I would use that word, aloof, in relationships, like not having like big expectations of people, of the men, and like them, and then knowing that, oh, they're going to let me down anyway, So I think that's like a big thing that happens with divorce. Now, Myrna, do you think the relationship your father had with your mother set any tone for your relationships with men?
I do, actually. I think it did. My parents didn't have the best relationship throughout my childhood. I mean, my father has now passed, so towards the end of his life, and a real good swatch of time there towards the end, their relationship was pretty healthy. But growing up, that's not what I saw. So by the time, I got married, which was at a very young age, I think I was kind of looking for the type of security that I didn't think my family gave me or my parents gave me. So, I settled with my husband. We had children when we were really young, and I just sort of got married and then ended up committing to that for a very long time. And I think seeing my parents break up, make up, kind of influenced that. Like, I was just going to ride it out, despite the fact that getting married at such a young age meant that we had a lot of, was tumultuous at times, not always, but at times. But yeah, I do think it definitely influenced my marriage. It influenced my selection and who I chose too, because in many ways, I feel like my husband is the better version of my dad. And I don't mean that to say I think I had a bad dad. I don't. There were flaws he had. And I think I married someone who's similar to my dad, but then where there were these issues that I kind of resented my dad for, my husband came along and was, better, so to speak, at that. Like he stuck it out with me for as long as, the marriage lasted. And rightfully so, I walked away from the relationship, where with my parents, I think it wasn't the case. I feel like it was a little bit of both of them giving up. And then ultimately sticking it out. So they ended up being a really good example for me of that. But yeah, definitely it influenced my marriage, and it has influenced my dating relationships in a lot of ways too, because I recognize we don't have a lot of time in this earth, and I really don't want to spend time with anybody that's temporary. I'm always looking for something that's, going to be stable and meaningful. So definitely yes.
That's awesome. Now I'm going to pose a question to everyone. And this is kind of fun, about what was your favorite memory of your dad? I can start by saying, like, my dad worked at for British Airways. So my favorite memory, and like my dad did everything in kind of like a first class manner. He was the life of the party. He was always like, hey, if you do it big. And my favorite memory was traveling first class to London. And we did that a few times, and it was just so much fun. And I just remember my dad saying, he's like, you must dress the part. You have to dress, it's like you put on your Sunday's best to to travel. And it was fun because we got first class service. Tam, what about you? What's your favorite memory of your dad?
Well, I wish I had gone first class to London, but that sounds like a lot of fun. My favorite with my dad was always when he was here, because my parents did have a bit of a long distance for a while, like relationship and things like that. But when he was here, he would take me to school every morning. And that was just kind of like just me and him time because, you know, with my two siblings, my mom, my grandma, you know, a lot of people always in the house. Being the typical middle child, I always kind of felt like I got lost in the shuffle. But like those morning rides to school or even the walks when I was in elementary school, because I didn't live that far, it was just me and him. So I felt like that was like our time that was like exclusively like mine. I didn't have to share him with anybody else. So that is probably like my favorite memory. It wasn't like us necessarily like doing anything, but it was just those moments that were spent of just me and him.
That's nice. Carrie?
I actually have 3, but I'm not going to bombard you guys with it. But I love going after Tam or Myrna because they give me the best ideas. But I'm not going to use something similar, which was a great memory of my father taking care of my sister and I when we were young, when my mother was in the States for like 2 years. So he was our caretaker and he did everything. But I'm not using that example. I'm going to fast forward to when I used to come home in the summers from college. And he and I used to stay up late at night, like reading the lyrics from my CDs and me telling him about why I selected this music and him just acting like he was so interested. That was always fun. That's when we did like Outcast and a whole bunch of stuff, including, oh my God, what is her name? Alanis Morissette. Like I was trying to explain the ironic song to him and he acted so interested. I love it. And also another big thing with us was watching boxing together. So we used to do that growing up. I used to watch wrestling when wrestling was hot. We used to have like WWE like every 3 months on NBC, I think. And then we would watch boxing on HBO. So that's what we did together and we would have fun. So those are some of my great memories with him. Boxing, and I guess it's all about TV and music.
How about you, Myrna?
I love both of your stories so far. It gives me some ideas too about memories with my dad. I have a lot to choose from too. They're just maybe not favorite memories, but like mile markers in my life where I can remember what it felt like to be with my dad, or you know the feeling I had inside. Just the last I think great memory that I have that it really is my favorite is the last trip my parents took to visit me in Florida before my dad passed. So it was probably the winter before he actually ended up passing, almost a year. But there was a day that we were sitting at the kitchen counter. I think it was the day before they were set to leave New York. And it was my dad, sister, and mom that were in town together. And me and him just sat at the counter having coffee and talking. And he just started to share stories about when he was in the military, what his first relationship with his first wife was like, just stuff that I had kind of known about, just, you know, just stories families tell. And my older siblings, being from his first marriage, would share stories about their childhood and their parents' marriage. But I was hearing it from his perspective, which was new. And I remember just sitting there thinking like, oh my God, like this is a side of my dad I've never seen. Him talking about the military and you get like wide-eyed and remembering what his youth was like. And so it was like insight into this man that, for all intents and purposes, was kind of a mystery to me. My dad is a man of few words, was a man of few words. So it's my favorite memory because I'm so grateful that I got to see that version of him, not just hear the stories, but see him telling the stories and how animated he was about it all. And I don't know where it came from, but I'm so grateful that I was able to have that experience with him. So that's probably my most favorite. There are like 100 others. When he would take us to Nathan's and we play, you know, in the arcade and have hot dogs, or when we've gone to amusement parks, stuff like that. So movies, like so many of my favorite movies growing up, like Jurassic Park, My Cousin Vinny, like these were occasions we'd go to the movies together. When they come on, I always think of that. Like I saw this with my dad. So tons of favorite memories, but definitely that it wasn't the last conversation we had, but it came from nowhere. And that for me will always be a lasting memory. I hope I remember all of the details of it until I'm a little old lady.
That's so sweet.
That's really nice. So I have one final question to pose to everyone. What lesson did you learn from your father that still resonates with you today? Tam?
For me, it may not sound like a big deal, but I feel like it kind of is like setting the like tone for like who I am as a person, good and bad. My dad was very strict on time. He was always like, don't be late anywhere because that's like disrespectful of people's time. He's like, it makes you look lazy if you can't manage to get, somewhere on time. He's like, if you know what time you have to be somewhere, like you have to like make the effort to be there. He would always say early to bed, early to rise makes the marriage healthy, wealthy, and wise. And like, it's something that was like, I don't know, like I don't even know if he was like intentional in saying it, but I was a little girl walking to school and to have your dad say the same thing to you every day. Remember, early to bed, early to rise makes you healthy, wealthy, and wise. And I feel like those things have like taken action in me, and like I'm never late anywhere. Faith, this, like I give you like a hard time if you're ever like late picking me up to do anything. I get like so much anxiety if like someone is running late because I'm like, what are we doing here? And I feel like I just always feel like I just have to show up. And like I said, I don't know if that was his intention. I don't know if that's what he meant when he would say those things, but that's really like what I took from it. And that kind of like shaped who I am as a person as far as like in my relationships, with my friends, like when I go to work, like I'm just always showing up. I'm always on time, like literally and figuratively. So even though it wasn't something that he maybe meant to stick with me the way that it did, it is probably the most lasting thing that he's like said that I can just like, I know that I will just like Myrna said, when I'm a little old lady, like I'll still be telling people like early to bed, early to rise, like, like that's just going to be like my mantra for life. So I feel like that's like probably like the most, like, in that regard.
I like it. With me, it's definitely my father drilled in my head to be a leader, and not really aggressively, but never to be a follower. Like I could never come home from school as a school-age child and say, such and such said this, or such and such wants me to do this, or such and such has this. He wasn't having it. So he always stressed being a leader and being in charge of myself. And I've always maintained that. So one, not to ever hear his mouth about it, but it just shaped itself naturally. And I am a leader, and I do take that seriously. And I say it to my kids to this day, like, they cannot tell me anything about like what's in style or what everyone else is doing. I don't want to hear it. They're like, oh, look at this belt. I'm like, oh, that's what's in style? Well, then you're definitely not getting it because you're not going to follow the trend, buddy. You better had told me something else. So yeah, being a leader, and I love him for it. So I guess he shaped me to be a boss all my life, and I took it to heart.
Well, for me, I'm going to say it's that family is everything. My family is really, really tight knit. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up with like half siblings, but that's not a term that we ever use in our family. Sometimes I'll say it to kind of describe what they are because they're not my mom's children. But we just kind of grew up very closely knit. And that's the case even to my father's death. I mean, he didn't have huge circles of friends. And I feel like the people that I grew up around that were his closest friends were his friends throughout the entire life. Like there would be people that would kind of make their way into the circle, but just kind of drifted along. But there's a nuclear there that was always there. So even his friendships, I think, were valuable. And he had a lot of respect for the people around him. Although my father had a bad temper, so there'd be moments, tips, people would get upset with him. But for the most part, everybody sort of knew him as this very family oriented man, and family is everything. And that's something that I carry with me. And I think I'm instilling in my children. Your sibling relationships are super important. That's something he instilled in me. He's very, 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 very close to his sisters. And brothers, but especially his two sisters. So that's something that I think he modeled. He expected of us too, that we would look out for each other. And I have that expectation with my children too. If your sister's in a fight, guess what? You're in a fight too. That's kind of the philosophy here at home. Like, I want to hear about 4 knuckles flying, not just, your sister having to, defend herself. So yeah, family is everything. You do what it takes to take care of them. That's kind of the vibe I had growing up. And even now that he's gone, I still have a lot of reverence for the relationship with my siblings because of him. So, yeah, family's important. That's the legacy.
That's good. I think with me, like my dad, anyone that knew him, like he was always like the life of the party. Like he walked in the room and he like commanded, he got the attention. And it's so funny because one of the things that he really taught me is about being a good friend. Like I didn't learn, and a lot of, just like how you said, Myrna, a lot of those friends came from like childhood growing up in Jamaica. And the things that he said about him, I was like, wow, you know, I'm like, who are you talking about? You talking about the same person? But I always, you know, saw that if anything, and I think I wrote that for his funeral, like I was like, if anything, he wasn't the perfect person, but he was a great friend. And I think it's his personality. He had that type of outgoing personality. It's funny because to this day, when I hear music, and my dad's been gone, almost 8 years. But if I hear Bob Marley, Lively Up Yourself, I immediately think of my father. So.
Yeah, I know we've talked about that before when we're like coming in Key West and the song comes on, you're like, yeah, this is like my favorite Bob Marley song.
Yeah. So it's just funny. So I'm like, it's something about that song. And it's just like, you know, you think about just laying back. He used to like to, I remember we used to go on the beach, like Sundays on the Bay. He would go on Sundays. He'd be like, hey, let's go and listen to some music. I could have school the next day. He's like, you know, he was just like that cool dad, like, you know, he didn't have the structure as mom, but, you know, it was cool to hang out for a time. But so ladies, we have completed the Fathers episode. Next week, I look forward to continuing our series as we talk about thank you for joining us at Unapologetically Fierce with Faith, brought to you by CKJ Live. Come back and visit again to hear more of the unfiltered tea that we are ready to dish. And remember, we are not just a podcast, we are a movement.